For 20 years, everyone in the business world knew one story about Eleanor Hayes. She was the brilliant CEO who had built a global technology company from a tiny rented office into a billion-dollar enterprise. Magazine covers praised her determination, investors admired her sharp decisions, and employees respected her discipline. Yet behind every photograph was a wheelchair that had become an inseparable part of her life. At 35, Eleanor had survived a devastating car accident while returning from a business conference. The injuries left her unable to move her legs. Surgeons saved her life, but every specialist she met afterward gave the same heartbreaking conclusion: the damage was permanent. Some doctors encouraged her to focus on adapting to life in a wheelchair instead of hoping for recovery. It wasn't cruel advice. It was simply the best medical opinion they had. Eleanor accepted reality, but she never stopped asking questions. Every year she visited new rehabilitation centers, consulted neurologists, and read medical research. She spent millions of dollars on advanced therapies, robotic rehabilitation equipment, and experimental treatments. Some brought tiny improvements in muscle strength, while others changed nothing at all. Hope would rise with every new promise and quietly disappear after another disappointing result. Despite everything, she refused to let her condition define her leadership. Her office was designed to be fully accessible. She attended every important meeting, mentored young entrepreneurs, and established a charitable foundation that funded rehabilitation programs for people with spinal injuries. She believed that even if she could not walk again, she could still help others move forward. Still, there were moments no one saw. Late at night, after the board meetings ended and the office became silent, Eleanor would look out of the floor-to-ceiling windows at people hurrying along the sidewalks below. She missed ordinary things more than luxury, walking through a park after the rain, climbing stairs without assistance, or simply standing to hug someone she cared about. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, while executives prepared for a critical investor presentation, an exhausted delivery driver carrying several heavy document boxes entered the company headquarters. He apologized for being a few minutes late, smiled politely, and quietly noticed something in Eleanor's posture that every renowned specialist had somehow overlooked. The delivery driver adjusted the stack of document boxes in his arms and waited patiently outside the executive conference room. His name was Daniel Brooks, a 38-year-old single father who worked long hours to support his 10-year-old daughter. Delivering packages wasn't the career he had once imagined, but after his wife passed away several years earlier, he accepted every shift he could find to keep food on the table and provide a stable life for his child. When the receptionist apologized for the delay, Daniel simply smiled. "No problem," he replied. "I'll wait." A few minutes later, the conference room door opened. Several executives walked out discussing financial reports, followed by Eleanor in her wheelchair. Behind her came a well-known neurologist reviewing a thick folder of medical records. As Daniel stepped forward to hand over the packages, he couldn't help noticing how carefully Eleanor held her upper body. Her shoulders were uneven, and every few moments she subtly shifted her weight, as though trying to relieve discomfort. It reminded him of someone he had known years earlier. "My apologies," Eleanor said politely. "Thank you for waiting." Daniel nodded, then hesitated. "I hope you don't mind me asking," he said carefully. "Have you ever had someone evaluate how your posture affects your movement?" The doctor looked up immediately. "We've evaluated everything," he answered with confidence. "Ms. Hayes has been treated by leading specialists around the world." Daniel quickly raised his hands. "I'm not questioning anyone's expertise." The room became quiet. "My late wife was a physical therapist," he continued gently. "Before she passed away, I spent years helping her care for patients at home. I learned a little by watching her. Sometimes people developed severe muscle guarding and joint restrictions that looked worse than the original injury. She always reminded me never to ignore what the body is trying to say." The doctor remained skeptical. Eleanor, however, noticed that Daniel wasn't claiming to have a miracle cure. He wasn't selling a treatment or asking for money. He simply spoke with quiet sincerity. What exactly did you notice? She asked. Daniel met her eyes respectfully. I noticed that everyone has been looking at your legs, he said softly. But the first thing I saw was the tension in your neck, shoulders, and spine. Eleanor couldn't stop thinking about Daniel's words. They were simple, respectful, and completely different from the promises she had heard over the past 20 years. He hadn't claimed he could cure her. He hadn't criticized her doctors. He had only suggested that perhaps something important had been overlooked. The following week, she invited Daniel to return after business hours. The company's rehabilitation consultant also agreed to be present, making it clear that no treatment would be attempted, only an observation. Daniel looked uncomfortable standing in the spacious office. I should say this again, he began. I'm not a medical professional. If I notice anything, it should always be checked by qualified specialists. Eleanor appreciated his honesty. For nearly an hour, they talked, instead of examining her condition. Daniel shared stories about helping his late wife during home visits. Many of her patients had lived with chronic pain for years. She often explained that when muscles stay tense for a long time, the body can develop unhealthy movement patterns that make even small motions more difficult. Her first step was always to listen to the patient before suggesting any exercises. Only after the conversation did the rehabilitation consultant ask Eleanor to perform a few gentle upper body movements. Daniel quietly watched. May I ask one question? He said. The therapist nodded. Does she always lean slightly to the left like that? The therapist paused before looking more carefully. I've honestly never measured it. Several posture assessments were performed. They revealed significant muscle imbalance around Eleanor's shoulders, neck, and upper back, problems that had gradually developed during 2 decades of wheelchair use. These issues did not explain her original spinal injury, but they were contributing to pain, stiffness, poor balance, and limiting the movement she still had. The consultant recommended a detailed reassessment by a multidisciplinary rehabilitation team. Over the next several months, Eleanor began a carefully supervised program focused on posture, flexibility, strength, breathing, and wheelchair positioning. Progress was slow and sometimes frustrating, but for the first time in years, everyday tasks became slightly easier. She could sit more comfortably, maintain better balance, and transfer with less assistance. One evening, after completing another therapy session, Eleanor smiled through tears. Daniel hadn't walked into her life with a miracle. He had walked in with something just as valuable, the courage to notice what everyone else had stopped looking for. The rehabilitation program lasted nearly a year. There were no dramatic moments, no overnight recoveries, and no miracle treatments. Some weeks, Eleanor made noticeable progress, while other weeks she felt as if she had taken 2 steps backward. There were days when the exercises left her exhausted and discouraged. More than once, she considered quitting, convinced that nothing meaningful would ever change. During those difficult moments, Daniel would occasionally send a short message through her assistant. Progress isn't always measured by distance. Sometimes it's measured by persistence. Those words became a quiet source of encouragement. With guidance from her rehabilitation team, Eleanor gradually gained better balance, stronger upper body control, and greater confidence in transferring from her wheelchair. Months later, using parallel bars and supportive braces, she managed to stand for several seconds. The therapists applauded, but Eleanor simply closed her eyes. It was the first time in 20 years she had viewed the world from a standing position. Tears rolled down her face, not because she was completely healed, but because she had discovered that improvement was still possible. At the company's annual employee gathering, Eleanor chose not to speak about business profits or future investments. Instead, she shared the lesson her journey had taught her. For years, she said, I believed every answer had already been found because I had consulted the best experts. What I learned is that expertise is essential, but so is curiosity. Medicine advances because people continue asking thoughtful questions. Never confuse "we don't know yet" with "nothing can ever change." She publicly thanked her medical team for embracing a fresh evaluation and then invited Daniel onto the stage. Embarrassed by the applause, he shook his head. I didn't save anyone, he said. The therapists, doctors, and Eleanor did the hard work. I simply spoke up because I noticed something that reminded me of my wife. Eleanor smiled. And that's exactly why your voice mattered. The audience rose in a standing ovation, not for a miracle, but for humility, teamwork, and the courage to look beyond assumptions. From that day forward, Eleanor's foundation expanded its mission, funding rehabilitation programs that encouraged collaboration between specialists, therapists, patients, and families. She wanted every person facing a life-changing injury to remember one truth. Hope is strongest when compassion, careful observation, and evidence-based care work together.